Hello, once again. I am back with more notes on House of Leaves. Today we will be going through notes on chapter 15, which starts on page 353. A few disclaimers. I hate editing, so you're just getting this raw and uncut. And as Bob Ross says, and I think Mark C. Donalewski agrees in regards to House of Leaves, there are no mistakes. So whatever happens, happens. Also, spoilers. Yeah, spoilers, because that's what I have to talk about. I'm talking about references and various things, and sometimes I reference future past events to show links and everything. So that's it. We're going to start with the inscription at the top of the chapter. My book is covered in notes, so I just try and move them out of the way when I can. The notes that I have written here, don't worry about reading them. They'll be on the Word document that is also on the screen here. So yeah. And also, I only speak English, so excuse my pronunciation of any of the other languages. I try. Okay. So we're going to start off with Hein. So this book is actually a quote from the Book of Songs, poem, and my Roman numerals are not very good. LV 111. Or I. Yeah. So the rest of the quote and the translation is, "This world, this life are fragments unconnected. But I, a German teacher, have selected the scattered fragments he together tags in an intelligible combination, and with nightcap's rags stops all the holes and completes creation." I also liked the poem that came before this. Let's talk more about that poem, I guess. So that kind of fits House of Leaves, right? Is that we have all these different fragments that seem unconnected, but we have this German teacher. We could argue whether it's who that is, Johnny, Zampano, Pelafina, Mark Z. Donalewski himself. They have gathered these fragments together to try and make it an intelligible combination. But it is also this idea of a creation, creating this whole world, right? Okay, and I also want to talk about the poem that comes before this one in the Book of Songs by Hein. "I have lied to thee so fondly that I've lied my heart away, that my own deceit has snared me, and to earnest turned my play. So that when with perfect reason lightly now from me thou turnest, powers of darkness seize their victim, and I shoot myself in earnest." I thought that was interesting, this whole idea about lying and deceit, and something that starts out as this kind of fun thing turns earnest. And you can end up hurting yourself by playing with things, right? Hein, I thought this was an interesting thing. They'd say this phrase in Europe, especially during the World War II and all that, to make an appeal to Hein, so the virtues of the liberal press in Europe during the Nazi regime, because he was a champion of this idea of Feuilleton. Sure. It's an attachment to political newspapers about non-political news. So example, that's like fashion, literature, art, criticism, that kind of stuff. Kind of like footnotes to a paper, maybe. Yeah. And Johnny and the editors in the footnotes here are having a conversation with each other, which I thought was interesting. Then we have footnote 322, which tells us that this is actually quoted in a letter from Freud to Jung, and we can actually read the letter here. I'm not going to read the whole letter. This one right here. 1908, February. They wrote each other a lot. February 25th. We're still in January. We wrote each other every day. 1, February 15th. That's February 17th. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my stomach. It's growling at me. February 25th. Right here. What you write about your chief sounds reassuring. I shall admire the phenomenon as it deserves. It is indeed a rare virtue of which I do not feel capable. It is... I'm not going to read the whole letter. I don't think it's significant enough to read, but I thought it was interesting. So I pulled out some important lines that I thought were important. Anyways. Your judgment of the hysteria formulas, and even more so your observations about my work, have given me a rarely experienced satisfaction. I know that what you say is true, that my manner of working is indeed honest, which is why my knowledge is so fragmentary, and why I am usually incapable of handling a presentation of any length. I have suppressed my habit of conscious speculation as radically as possible, and have absolutely forsworn the temptation to fill in the gaps in the universe. But except for you, who believes me. I shall write you my fantasies about paranoia soon. They coincide in part with your ideas. Today I am too tired from monotonous hard work and need a Sunday to catch my breath. You are right, the thing is not yet ripe, and I can't work with the shadowy memories now at my disposal. Consequently, I wish you would take the whole problem over. So I thought it was interesting, these ideas that maybe... I don't know who's Freud and who's Jung when it comes to like Johnny and Zampano working on this together, but it's like Johnny's making observations about Zampano's works. I have suppressed my habit of conscious speculation, just letting everything flow out. And there we have the quote, fill in the gaps of the universe. Fantasies about paranoia and schizophrenia are a theme throughout House of Leaves. And then consequently, I wish you would take the whole problem over, like Johnny takes over for Zampano. And then we have this footnote, number 4. I don't know why. Oh, it's probably because it's on this page. I don't know why I didn't highlight it. Let's fix that. Vallombrosa is a city/forest in Italy, home to Italy's tallest tree. We know trees are significant in House of Leaves. And abbey, and it means shaded valley. So, that was cool. Okay. Page 354 here, we have footnote 325. Yeah, I counted the amount of X's. You can see my little dots counting them. 978 is how many there were, and I was trying to think of what significance that could be. And 1978 is actually the year that Pelafino was put into Whalestow. So I don't know. Maybe a bit of a stretch there, but I thought it was interesting. Then we have footnote 327. Here I highlighted audiences just want to get back to the house. And I thought there's a lot of readers who complain about the footnotes and complain about Johnny's story, and they just want to read the story of the house. They don't care about all this extra stuff. So I thought that was interesting to do this. And they're not getting the full story if you're not reading the footnotes, in my opinion. Okay, so this whole chapter references a bunch of people, and I just made a list of who's real and who's not real. So let's just go through that. Leslie Stern, this person here, she may be a real person, but the person I found is a neurosurgeon and not a psychiatrist. So I don't know. Jennifer Antipala, she's not real. Antipala actually comes from the Greek word meaning enemy or opponent. Then we have Douglas R. Hofstadter. He's a real person. So let's talk about him. He's an American cognitive and computer scientist whose research includes concepts such as the sense of self in relation to the external world. He wrote this really interesting book called Gödel, Escher, and Bach. The book discusses how systems can acquire meaningful context despite being made of meaningless elements. So, like House of Leaves, we're trying to find this context, this meaning within it, but it's got a lot of meaningless stuff, like why is all this included, right? So he also has a chapter in the book that is referenced in this chapter called on Achilles and the Tortoise, and it is quite long, but Little Harmonic Labyrinth, interesting there. It's 24 pages long, so I'm not going to read it, but out loud here, but it's an interesting thing. If you want to read it, I'll include the link in the description bar. All the links I have are included in the description bar. He also has this idea of the individual neurons in the brain coordinate to create a unified sense of a coherent mind. So this idea of like these individual things, seemingly unique and different, actually, and maybe meaningless, come together to work and create something coherent. And his book is filled with, different meta references and puzzles and stuff. Okay. Achilles and the Tortoise. I think I talked about that somewhere else. Okay, Byron Baleworth is not a real person. Andrew Ross, he may be real, but he's not a literature professor at Princeton. He's actually a professor of sociology at Princeton. So, yeah. We already talked about Jennifer Antipala. Camille Paglia. She's a real person. She argues that human nature has an inherently dangerous Dionysian or Catonic aspect, especially in regard to sexuality. So culture and civilization are created by men and represent an attempt to contain that force. But women are powerful too, but as natural forces. And both marriage and religions are means to contain chaotic forces. I copied and pasted that from Wikipedia. I have not read Camille Paglia, but there you go. Then we have Anne Rice, who's real. I didn't write any notes about her because it is to see if everyone knows about Anne Rice. She wrote Interview with the Vampire. Yeah. Harold Bloom is a critic. He's cited throughout House of Leaves. He's also cited on page 547. I didn't highlight it. Oh, this whole quote is from Harold Bloom. And we'll talk about the bald gnome error. I'm so excited to get to the bald gnome error when we get there. So Harold Bloom he's probably the most famous literary critic in the English-speaking world. I'm surprised if you are involved in literature in any way and you haven't heard of Harold Bloom. He wrote The Anxiety of Influence. So his central thesis is that poets are hindered in their creative process by the ambiguous relationship they necessarily maintain with their precursor poets. So it's like building on the shoulders of giants, right? That your creativity, your becoming a writer or a poet or whatever, you have a relationship with the poets and everything that came before you. So while admitting the influence of extra literary experience on every poet, he argues that the poet in a poet is inspired to write by reading other poets' poetry, and will tend to produce work that is in danger of being derivative of existing poetry and therefore weak. I thought that was interesting idea that we can't escape our influences. That everything we could be argued that everything that we create is derivative of our experience of other people's works. So there's that. Also said the book referenced on page 547 talks about the bald gnome error. Okay, let me go over to the next page. What is this note then? Oh, elements of Gothic fiction. That's just a random note stuck in there. We'll talk about later. Then we have a poet, or that could be a poet. It could also be a reference to Marksy Danilevsky's sister. Her first name is Anne, but she goes by the stage name Poe. So I thought that would be maybe a reference to her. We talked about these ones. Stephen King, real person. His books are actually referenced in House of Leaves. For example, I didn't write what page number it was on because that would have been too easy. But in footnote 167, we get a reference to some Stephen King works, The Breathing Method in Different Seasons, and a fake story called Tabular, which I've looked all over for, because why would he list a bunch of real Stephen King works and then this fake one? I don't know. Steve Wozniak is like one of the founders of Apple, right? He's real. Then we have Jacques Derrida. I said he was referenced here before. Marksy Danilevsky actually worked on a movie about Derrida as well. He's referenced 10 other times by name in House of Leaves. So, yeah, I've talked about him before. The next person is Walter Mosley. We've already talked about these ones, that's why I'm skipping over them. Walter Mosley is a real author. He wrote hard-boiled crime detective stories. He's most well known for stories that intersect racial and social injustices. That's interesting. The next person is Kiki Smith. They are real as well. They're an artist. Their sculptures, their work includes sculptures of hearts, lungs, stomachs, liver, and spleen. Was related to this was her work exploring bodily fluids, which also had social significance as a response to the AIDS crisis and women's rights. So she worked with blood, and then urine, menstrual blood, and feces. Yeah. I am working on a theory about the different body parts within House of Leaves, and who's associated with what. So I thought that was an interesting reference. Hunter S. Thompson is real, and he's well known for starting gonzo journalism, or establishing gonzo journalism. It's a style of journalism that is written without claims of objectivity. So it's not objective, it is, the reporter is a part of the story. It's a reporting of personal experiences and emotions, which is in contrast to the traditional journalism, which is very detached style, relying on facts and quotations. Stanley Kubrick is also real. I found this quote from Danilevsky that said it's called the Rumpus interview, that Kubrick was the patron saint of House of Leaves. I also thought The Shining, this idea of this haunted house or person with the scary hallway and the shifting layouts. And the last person, here's David Copperfield, who's also real, and he's a magician who makes large things disappear. Yeah. We're going to go back here to page 355 and actually talk about references and stuff, not just people. But first, let's talk about the meta jokes within all the references here. So, for example, David Copperfield believes it's an actual trick. Camille Paglia acknowledges the depth and power of femininity. She's often actually described as the anti-feminist feminist. And also interesting that Stephen King, the master of horror, is afraid. Okay. On page 355, we get a reference to Chagall print, and that's actually an error. It should be Chagall with 2 L's. He also did large-scale paintings, including part of the ceiling of the Palais Garnier. Yes. So I did a video about the Grand Staircase in House of Leaves, and found lots of references indirect to the Palais Garnier, the opera house in Paris, and how it refers to how it's important for House of Leaves. And to find this other reference was pretty cool. So I'll include a link to that video. I won't talk about the Grand Staircase here, but this is the painting that Chagall did for the Palais Garnier at different points in Paris. There's the Arc de Triomphe, there's the Eiffel Tower. Yeah, so I thought that was really cool to find that. I already referenced Jennifer Antipala. Antipala means enemy or opponent. On the next page, we get this reference to Bach's Little Harmonic Labyrinth, which I'm going to play for you here. I think it will work. Sound should pick up, I hope. This video explains it. We're just going to listen to like a little bit of it. It's 5 minutes long, so I'll put it down below here. Play. I won't play the whole thing, but I think it's pretty cool to watch that. So there's this idea, this labyrinth is distinct from a maze in that a maze has different paths to choose from with the intent of causing confusion, whereas a labyrinth only actually has a single path with many convolutions that eventually arrive to a center. So Bach metaphorically directs us through a tour of the keys in this harmonic labyrinth. Beginning in the key of C, we traverse to distant keys until we eventually arrive at the center of the labyrinth. And we see him use tools such as diminished seventh chords to pivot into different tonal landscapes throughout the 3 movements of the song. We encounter a fugue in the center of the labyrinth, which features the rectus and inversus of the fugues superimposed upon each other. I love fugues so much. That's why I love Bach. Anyways, as well as the signature of his name implied musically at the end of the fugue. So in the final movement, we traverse similarly back into the labyrinth until reaching a restatement of the entrance of the labyrinth. And so the harmonic guide is intended to follow typically the bass line or whatever note is doubled at a particular instance in the work. So we follow the harmonic guide, we can attempt to see the logic in the way Bach chooses to pivot into different chords and tonal centers. We can see that oftentimes the harmonic guide dictates a kind of planetary center from which neighboring notes are chosen for these melodies and chords. I'm not going to take credit for that very beautifully put together explanation. I found that on Reddit, and I'll include that link down below. Yeah, and I thought that was really cool. Then we get this reference to from Hofstadter about Achilles and the tortoise, which was that chapter that I explained in his book. So the basic idea is that there's this paradox that Achilles and the tortoise are in a race, and the tortoise starts first, and Achilles can never catch up to the tortoise because he always has to keep reaching where the tortoise is first. And so the tortoise has to constantly be ahead of him for him to reach where the tortoise is. And I liked that idea, is that we can never understand the book because we're actually always going to be catching up with Mark C. Danilewski, who's ahead of us the whole step here. We get a reference to La Fortuna on 71st Street, which is an actual place, the Café La Fortuna, and I found this quote from somewhere. I didn't include the reference, sorry. It's in New York. But in many ways, the space has remained constant, the same black tin roof and brick walls decorated with the same vinyl records and sepia-toned autograph photos that have accumulated over the years. So I thought that was interesting that the space has remained constant. Yeah. And then we have a reference to Saint Sebastian. He actually, it says Saint Sebastian died of heartburn. He didn't. He died by being shot by a bunch of arrows. And I couldn't find the playwright that he was quoting here. So I don't think it's a real reference. Okay. Page 357. We get this reference to the Bowery Bar. It was also referenced in the chapter before this. Reference to the Bowery Bar. I think the Bowery Bar might be CBGB's because that's the only, like, the most famous bar in the Bowery neighborhood of New York. Okay, next page. Kierkegaard. And this idea of repetition. So there's a book called Repetition written by Kierkegaard under a pseudonym. Interesting because there's the issue of who actually wrote House of Leaves, right? Yeah, it's where he explores the question of whether true repetition can exist. So it actually reflects, it's a fictional book, and it actually reflects Kierkegaard's. I got sick of writing Kierkegaard, so I just wrote K. Sorry, that small things entertain me. It reflects Kierkegaard's real life. So the character in the story regrets a proposal to the girl, which is the same as Kierkegaard in real life. And this is a quote from Kierkegaard about pseudonyms. I thought it was interesting. By taking place in the form of an imaginary construction, the communication creates for itself an opposition. And the imaginary construction establishes a chasmic gap between reader and author and fixes the separation of inwardness between them, so that a direct understanding is made impossible. So I thought that was interesting that we have this this difference, this separation between knowing who the true author is, because they're not even using their real name, and the people who are reading it. Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. Footnote 329. Immuna. It's a Hebrew or Jewish term, and it has two meanings. It's a belief, a basic assumption that lies at the root of a religious doctrine, as in emunat v'diyat. I do not speak Hebrew. Beliefs and ideas. Okay, it also means faithful without fail. And we have this quote from a Jewish text, and Moshe's hands remained aloft without fail until sunset. So I thought that was interesting. So a basic assumption that lies at the root of religious doctrine, or faithful without fail. Yeah. As you can see, I got really interested in the names of the publishers here because they're not real publishers. And then we have this word niscience. That's how we're going to pronounce it. Niscience, which means absence of knowledge or awareness, ignorance, or agnosticism. So this idea that we have two meanings here, this kind of idea of not knowing. I thought they were interesting. What are we not aware of not knowing in regards to House of Leaves? Pavernocnurst? Sure. I thought this could possibly be a reference to Paver Nocturnus, or the night terror. Nightmares. We got a reference to nightmares throughout the text as well. And this reference to narcissism's Tad. Interesting name. Narcissism's paternal darkness. Tad is actually the name of Mark Zdanowski's dad, and he didn't have a very good relationship with his father. So I thought that was interesting. Page 359, we get this little box, and a lot of people have these box boxes. It could be a possible printing error after the word uncanny. It probably should be a footnote reference for footnote 330 because there's not a 330 footnote referenced on this page, so it's that reference down here. And so we're going to talk about Anthony Vidler in footnote 330, and the Architectural Uncanny, which is a real book. And 1 second, the link. Why isn't the link? Okay. I'm just going to copy that. Oh, wrong window. I'll just paste it in here. I found it on Scribd, of all places. Yeah, so you can read it here if you want. Anyways, I thought the epigraph of that book was interesting. Some languages in use today can only render the German expression an unheimlich house by a haunted house, which is from Freud. And I discussed Freud in the previous chapter as well. So houses are supposed to be familiar. They're supposed to be full of family history, nostalgia, shelter, private comfort. And they become uncanny or unhomely when contrasted with the terror of alien spirits. Is what Vidler refers to them at. He actually uses the fall of the House of Escher as an example. So the house itself isn't that scary. It's actually quite familiar. But what contributes to the eeriness is the fantasies or the psychology of the narrator, who's kind of imposing his own inner turmoil upon the house. So it's we can argue that in House of Leaves, that the hallway and the house beneath the house is a reflection of the psychological fantasies, to use that word, of the people who enter it. Here's his chapter on unhomely houses. I put it into a Google Doc. I'm not going to read the whole chapter. Let's read it. Why not? How long is this video already? We're already at 32 minutes. Let's make it a little longer. Certainly the narrator loved his chimney. It provided warmth and stability for the entire house's structure and function. It did not, like his wife, talk back, and it represented, symbolically enough, a last bastion of the good past against the intrusions of a bad present. And yet the chimney, as he readily admitted, was something of a tyrant. 12 feet square at the base, 4 feet wide at the top, it completely usurped the center of the house, permitting no passage from one side to another, forcing the inhabitants into continual peripheral movement. So strong was its presence, indeed, that the narrator had become its slave. The chimney was master of its house, its owner stood behind it, deferring to it on every count, finally protecting it from destruction by withdrawing from the outer world, and mounting a continuous vigil lest it be demolished while his back was turned. Fear pervades this story, fear of being deprived of a backbone with the removal of the chimney, fear of losing the one permanence of the dwelling, fear of confrontation with the wife, fear, given the chimney's shape and vertical power, and loss of manhood. The chimney provided another kind of support also. It was the central object of the narrator's fantasy life, at once a reminder of the distant pyramids of Egypt and the dark Druidical ritual standing stones. It stood for the entire romantic history of origins, an monument, both life-giving and life-taking, harbinger of the eternal fire and tomb of kings. It was further an instrument of knowledge, an observatory pointed toward the heavens, in its bulk almost incommensurable, irreducible to the mathematical calculations of the architect, contemptuously called scribe. It could not be cut down to size, its inner recesses hiding unknown mysteries, and its external walls impermeable and silent. It was, as Hegel would have characterized it, the perfect type of symbolic architecture, an object not yet separated from the magical world of demons or the projected fantasies of men. Around this pyramid tomb, the house deployed itself depending on the chimney for sustenance and support. Because of its position, it was kind of a labyrinth, protecting the inner center from profane intrusion. The resulting confusion of rooms, each forced to act as passage to the next one with as many as 9 doors, generated a complex network of relations. Almost every room like a philosophical system, which in itself an entry or passageway to other rooms and systems of rooms, a whole suite of entries in fact. Like the daydreamer whose mental map these rooms seem to emulate, going through the house you seem to be forever going somewhere and getting nowhere. Indeed, one might entirely lose one's way. It is like losing oneself in the woods. Round and round the chimney you go, and if you arrive at all, it is just where you started, and so you begin again and get nowhere. We are reminded of the similar pattern of uncanny repetition in Freud's description of his strange experience of a particular quarter in a provincial town, the character of which could not long remain in doubt as painted women filled the windows of the small houses. I hastened to leave the narrow street at the next turning, but after having wandered about for a time without inquiring my way, I suddenly found myself back in the same street where my presence was now beginning to excite attention. I hurried away once more, only to arrive by another detour at the same place yet a third time. Now, however, a feeling overcame me, which I can only describe as uncanny. Freud compared his involuntary repetition, in reference to repetition, that transformed a peaceful Italian town, Genoa, into a site of Pyrenean claustrophobia, to being lost in the midst of a mountain forest, where every attempt to find the marked familiar path may bring one back again and again to one and the same spot, or to the experience of being lost in a dark, strange room, looking for the door or the electric switch, colliding time after time with the same piece of furniture. Melville's narrator had a similar sense of helplessness before the uncanny might of his chimney, and he seemed equally unwilling to track down the unconscious motivations of his involuntary acts. This need to veil the source of dependency was mirrored in the narrator's resistance to deciphering or interpreting his hermetic chimney. It was as if his own body were threatened with extinction. He preferred the pyramid to remain a primal force before writing, resisting all explanation like the hieroglyphs before Champollion. Even when as a last resort to persuade the owner to demolish the chimney, the architect invented the fiction of a reserved space, hermetically closed, a secret chamber hid in darkness. The narrator refused to search, not because he did not believe in its existence, but rather the opposite. He believed too much in mysteries. What the chimney concealed, its and his netherworld, should remain concealed. Infinite and sad mischief, he held, had resulted from the profane bursting open of secret recesses. Thus, precisely repeating Schilling's principle, by this means a kind of tacit treaty was reached between the subversive and comforting powers of the house, allowing it, during life of its last owner, to remain a home. So there's a lot of correlations there. Hopefully you could pick up on. I'll include that link in the description. Okay, I need a drink after that. Page 360, we get this word procrustean. I like interesting words, so I always talk about them. This means to enforce uniformity or conformity without regard to natural variation or individuality. It is nonsense. Okay. I didn't talk about Jacob's Angel or Mary's Frankenstein. Did I? I did not. Interesting. Okay, we'll just get that then. PS6, New York Public School, number 6. aka Lil de Blake School, named after a suffragette. So we're talking about Karen and feminism a lot in this section. So a school named after a suffragette seems fitting. She actually wrote under the pseudonym Tiger Lily, and she wrote for the Knickerbocker magazine in 1858. She actually had a fictional story of a woman named Melissa who murdered her tutor, who did not return her love by abandoning him in a cave without a lamp. I thought that was quite interesting because the cave, there's lots of references to caves, mountains, and spelunking and all that kind of stuff in reference to the hallway in House of Leaves. And we know that Navi gets lost at the end there. Without a lamp until he sees that spark of light that is Karen waiting for him. So Karen does not become this fictional woman abandoning her lover, or the person who did not love her, in a cave. And sometimes Ahab's whale is just a whale, meaning that, like, sometimes the curtains are just blue. I hope you get that reference. The idea that not everything has to be a metaphor, but that we can then infer, not an intentional metaphor on the author's part, but we can infer metaphorical meaning on things. Yeah. Also, just like the whale stow letters, maybe they're just letters. Okay, Hadrian's Pantheon. is actually the most famous and architecturally most influential rotunda, which is a roof building with a circular ground plan. And the name Pantheon is from the ancient Greek. I'm not going to try and pronounce that ancient Greek word because it's Greek to me. Okay, sorry. Which means of relating to or common to all the gods. Yeah. Then we have Justinian's Hagia Sophia. That was completed in 537 AD or BCE. No, CE. Can't remember the terms anymore. CE. Common Era. Becoming the world's largest interior space and among the first to employ a fully pendentive dome, which is a placing of a circular dome over a square room. It also is considered the epitome of Byzantine architecture and is said to have changed the history of architecture. We have Suger's Saint Denis, which was in the 12th century. The abbot Suger rebuilt portions of the abbey church, and he used innovative structural and decorative features, and in doing so he's said to have created the first truly Gothic building. We also get a reference to the roof of Westminster Hall, thanks to Herland. The hall is actually particularly notable for its hammer beam roof. So we're talking a lot about roofs here. And it's interesting because this image on the front here, excuse my note, people often think is of the staircase in House of Leaves, but if you watch my video on the grand staircase, this is actually a blueprint of the roof of the Grand Palais. Just FYI. Let me make sure we're still in frame here. Okay, yeah, so we talk a lot about roofs in this section. So Westminster Hall is particularly notable for its hammer beam roof, a form typical of English Gothic architecture, which uses horizontal trusses to span large distances. And the roof was commissioned for Richard II in 1393 and built by the royal carpenter Hugh Herland, and it is the largest clear span medieval roof in England. Then we get Wren's dome for St. Peter's, or St. Paul's, rather. So Sir Christopher Wren designed for St. Paul's Cathedral included a distinctive triple dome structure, a key feature of the iconic London landmark. This innovative design incorporates an outer dome, an inner dome, and a hidden brick cone, which all work together to support a lantern ball and cross at the dome's apex. Okay, then we get a reference to Artaud here. And it's interesting because Derrida wrote about Artaud in Parole Soufflé. I'll just open this up here. Turn on the window. This one here, interesting cover, as we can tell. But yeah, right here, Le Parole Soufflé, he writes about Antonin, make that bigger, Antonin Artaud. So Artaud conceptualized the theater of cruelty, and cruelty is, more profoundly, the unrelenting agitation of a life that has become unnecessary, lazy, or removed from a compelling force. So the theater of cruelty gives expression to everything that is crime, love, war, madness, in order to unforgettably root within us the ideas of perpetual conflict, a spasm in which life is continually lacerated, in which everything in creation rises up and asserts itself against our appointed rank. So, yeah, don't become lazy and necessary. There's fight. Keep that fight in your life. Type idea. Okay. Page 362. Fresh Kills Park, which is a real place. It's a planned park for New York, built on top of a landfill. Still a landfill. And the largest landfill in the world back in 2001. So the park didn't actually exist at this point, which is interesting. Then we're going to skip to page 364. Move this out of the way. And we're talking about what is a house? A riddle. The feminine void. horizontal 8, which is like the infinity symbol. Pretty darn scary. It's texture. It's an Heimlich. Let's see here. Electrical current. Dark. And the other or slash no other here. Those are just the different words to describe the house. And on page 365, this whole, these lines here, these dashes, these forward slashes or whatever you call them, is used in programming. And as we know, Mark Z. Danilewski was very interested in computer programming, especially in relation to House of Leaves, and how it first started online. We could argue that the blue and red and purple are all have to do with like hyperlinks and stuff like that. So referring to these forward slashes in programming is not too far of a stretch, I believe. So these are used to indicate the start of a single line comment. So everything following these lines should be ignored by the compiler or the interpreter. I thought that was interesting. Okay, 365. Let's go to page 366 over here. We get a reference to Charlie Yardbird Parker, who is a jazz saxophonist, a leading figure in the development of bebop music. He had mental health issues, and he actually attempted suicide and was placed into a mental hospital. So there's that kind of link with Pelafina there. And we get this phrase, Nike also Glot und Geckenstall. Yep. As I said before, nein sprechen Sie Deutsch. So, excuse my bad accent. This is actually a quote from a work called Shakespeare's Memory, written by Borges. And Borges is referenced throughout House of Leaves. Talked about it before. And so this is the quote in full. I wrote down another discovery. Shakespeare's apparent mistakes, those absence dans l'infini that Hugo apologetically mentions, were deliberate. Shakespeare tolerated them or weaved them into his plays, so that his discourse, destined to the stage, would seem spontaneous and not too polished and artificial. So this idea that you keep the mistakes in there to make it seem more real. And Mark Z. Danilewski has said repeatedly there are no errors in House of Leaves. And then we have page 368 here, footnote 336. This is real. I'm not going to show the picture because it is very disturbing. So this is the real photograph taken of a starving child, with the vulture, and the psychological damage it did to Kevin Carter. And Mark Z. Danilewski uses it as kind of like the same thing that happened to Navidson, is that he took this picture of Delisle, and it's this horrible situation where she was starving, and could he have saved her? Yeah, so I thought it was really interesting that he used this real photograph with this very tragic story, and wondering about the morality behind that, and why couldn't he just have used a made-up picture instead of this reference to something real? I don't know. What do you think? So let me know your thoughts on chapter 15. It's chapter 15 of House of Leaves. And as always, thank you for watching.